Okay, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
My name's Aaron Reitz. I'm the president of the Texas Federalist Society. Welcome to our encore event of the year. We thought that we would be done a couple weeks ago, but this is a hot topic. A lot of people have been discussing it, and the dates and our participants just lined up nicely, so we decided to have one. This really is our final event of the semester, I promise this time. For those who aren't familiar with the Federalist Society, as a national organization, it's a network of conservative and libertarian judges, scholars, lawyers, students, public policy experts, and elected officials who are interested in studying and also promoting the conservative and libertarian perspectives on law and policy. Here at the student chapter level, our bread and butter, sort of in service of that mission, is to regularly host debates or panels or speeches in order to bring those perspectives and have them challenged in a law school environment, which we believe, from the Federalist Society, isn't often faithfully represented in a law school environment. Now, today's event, like I said, is a very hot topic. Everybody talks about campus carry. Everybody has at least an amateur understanding of what's going on with this issue. I'll tell you, I'm especially appreciative of Ms. Gavran today. As we talked this morning, yes, thank you all for being here too. We worked through the Keep Guns Off Campus public list of signatories of professors all around the campus, about 150 professors all over this campus, including about a dozen here at the law school. All right, we received a total of 9 no's, 9 refusals to debate the Federalist Society sponsored speaker, Dr. Lott. Until finally, one of those professors came through and said, look, again, I still am unwilling to debate Dr. Lott, but I have a recommendation of somebody who's really sharp, she's really enthusiastic, she's well known among Keep Guns Off campus circles, and that's Ms. Gavran. So we really appreciate at least Ms. Gavran's willingness to engage on the issues. But again, that's really what the Federalist Society stands for, is exploring ideas, challenging one another, and we're glad that we had at least one person on the campus ready to hop into the ring and to represent a different perspective. So I won't say any more about our speakers. I just want to say thank you all for coming. I'll turn it over to our Vice President of Speakers, Ari Herbert, who will give a brief biographical intro to our speakers. Thank you.
Thanks for coming. Dr. John Lott earned his bachelor's degree from UCLA. He then went on and earned his PhD in economics from UCLA as well. He has held positions at Yale Law School, Stanford, UCLA, Wharton, Texas A&M, and Rice. He's been an outspoken gun rights advocate and, as is appropriate, a campus carry advocate. Ms. Julie Gavran is a PhD candidate at the University of Texas at Dallas in humanities. And she has a bachelor's in psychology and a master's in liberal studies from the Ohio Dominican University. Her research focuses on William James' famous essay, The Moral Equivalent to War, and the peace movement that has promoted since. Julie has been involved in the campus carry issue and has worked for the campaign to keep guns off campus since 2013. Please welcome our speakers.
Well, thanks very much. I greatly appreciate being invited. I just realized we both drove down from Dallas at the same time. We could have had somebody to talk to during the trip. So, anyway, I appreciate being invited. Obviously, with the attack in France, everybody's focus, again, is on these types of horrible mass shootings. Now, Europe has had, by far, the 2 worst public mass shootings that we've had in either Europe or North America. Obviously, there have been other mass shootings in other parts of the world. But here in the January attack at the Charlie Hebdo one, you'd have people who would be within 12 yards of the killers who would be willing, or 12 feet actually, who'd be able to take videos on their camera phones, but not able to stop the people or do anything to try to defend themselves. So there's three general points I'm going to be trying to get into here. One is the behavior of permit holders. Two is specific concerns about the risks of having permit holders on college campuses. And finally, the possible benefits of letting people be able to go and defend themselves. First of all, on the behavior of permit holders, any way you measure this, permit holders are extremely law-abiding. There are about 13 million, over 13 million concealed carry permit holders in the United States right now. That's an underestimate because in 10 states, you're no longer required to have a permit in all or virtually all the states. So I'm not sure how many people actually legally carry. But if you look at revocations for any reason, you're talking about tenths of a percentage point. If you're looking at revocations for any type of firearms-related violation across the states, you're talking about thousands or even tens of thousands of 1 percentage point. And even many of those involve things like in Texas, the #1 reason would be people not having their concealed handgun permit with them when they're stopped by a police officer. You know, they have a permit, they just don't have it physically on them at the time that they're stopped. Or people accidentally going into gun-free zones. You know, a number of years ago, you may remember Barry Switzer, the former coach of the Dallas Cowboys, getting stopped at the Dallas-Fort Worth airport because he forgot that he had his permit concealed handgun in his carry-on bag. It's true the Cowboys weren't having a good year that year, but presumably most people didn't really view him as a threat. But very simply, when you have that many people with concealed handgun permits, some are going to forget. I'll just give you one example. The state, Florida, stopped even breaking out the firearms-related violations in 2012. But if you look at the data up till then, from '87 to 2012, they had issued permits to 2.1 million people. The average person held the permit for almost 13 years. Of all those people having all those permits for all those years, you had 168 revocations. That's 8 thousandths of 1 percentage point. You know, as I say, it's basically hard to find any other group in the population that's as law-abiding as concealed carry permit holders are. One comparison you can make is to police officers. There's a study in Police Quarterly that came out in December 2010 where they used news reports to go and identify convictions of misdemeanors or felonies by police officers. So this is an underestimate of the crimes committed by police. But if you look at the data for misdemeanors or felonies, you're talking about 0.1%, okay? If you're looking at firearms-related violations from police, it's 0.017%. By contrast, the revocations for misdemeanors or felonies for permit holders is about 1/5 the rate if it is for police officers. And if you're looking at for firearms-related violations, again, it's about 1/5 for permit holders of this underestimate of the rate for police officers. Now, there's some numbers put out by a place called the Violence Policy Center. If you read the New York Times or other places, they frequently reference this. And they claim that over the last 8.75 years, 8¾ years, from January 2007 through September of this year, there were 763 deaths caused by permit holders. About 1/3 of those, they're saying, are suicides. But 278 of those are from one state, Michigan. And 215 of those are suicides. It just gives you an idea of the problems. They quadruple count even defensive gun uses as bad events. So if you go through and actually look at the Michigan State reports that they put out there, Michigan State reports list pending cases as well as whether they're convictions. You must know it can take a year or 2 years often for cases to go to court, even 3 or 4 years in some cases. And each year a case is pending, it's listed as pending. And they count pending cases. So let's say somebody uses a gun legitimately in self-defense in November of a year, and it's not tried until 15 months later. It's going to be listed as pending for 3 years. And then it's going to be, let's say the person's found not guilty, it's still listed as having been pending. And then also the group goes and looks at news stories. So if they got a news story on it, that case is going to be listed as 4 bad murders, even though the person was found to be not guilty because of self-defense. So it's just a complete mess. Again, a huge number of these are suicides just from one state, even Michigan. And what they do is they'll go and have data on suicides for the Michigan Department of Health, and then they know the names of the individuals, the permit holders, and then they don't look to see whether a gun was used in the suicide or where it occurred, in the home or outside, but they just match it. The problem is, I could go on for hours about this, but just one thing, I'll just mention the suicide rate for permit holders in Michigan is 40% less than the suicide rate for the general adult population in the state. And I could go on, but if you just look at their numbers for this year and assume an annual rate, they have 24 murders, okay, assuming all of them are right, I'm not debating them on this, and you have 13 million permit holders, this comes to an annual rate using their numbers, okay, an annual rate of 0.0002%, all right? Just imagine any other group, even if I accept their numbers, that has that low of a murder rate, or accidents. This also includes accidents in there. Okay, so how about experience with universities around the country? You know, so much of the debate involves hypothetical things that might happen. We don't have to guess. We can go and look. You have 11 states that currently mandate to varying degrees that permit holders are allowed to carry guns on public campuses. Another 21 states leave it up to the university. So Michigan, for example, Michigan State, which is the largest university there in the state, allows it. Though most of the schools in these states do not allow it, you still have a number that do. But the thing, so we can look at that. Plus, prior to the early 1990s, when we had the debate over the federal Gun-Free School Act, it was rare for schools to have it in either their student or faculty handbooks that permanent concealed handguns were banned. So the states that allowed concealed handguns allowed people to carry on school property. And yet, so we have a huge amount of experience on this. And yet, we really can't find any bad things that have happened. You cannot find one single case of a permit holder on a school where they're allowed to carry having committed a crime. And with regard to accidents, I can find over all these years 4 cases where there's been accidental discharge of a firearm, none of involving a fatality, and basically, in 3 of the cases, very minor harm. So what about college-age permit holders? Okay, in Texas, you have to be 21 to carry. They do allow people who are 18, 19, and 20 to carry when they've been threats. You can go to a judge and be issued a permit early. I have data by year of age for 3 states. So I can break it down by 22 and under, okay, and above 23. I could do it above 25. It'd make very little difference in the numbers. And so you can compare Michigan, college age, older, Nevada, college age, older, and Texas, college age, older. Not only is the overall revocation rate for everybody extremely low, but there's no evidence here that college-age permit holders have their permits revoked at a higher rate than the rest of the adult population. So what are the most common concerns that are raised? There's usually 2 common concerns that are raised in any of the legislative debates. One is, if you're going to have a mass shooting and a concealed handgun permit holder tries to stop it, the concern is that, well, maybe the permit holder will shoot a bystander. Or, when the police arrive on the scene, they may accidentally shoot the permit holder. I can identify several dozen cases over the last 5 years where permit holders have clearly stopped mass public shootings according to statements by either police or sheriffs or prosecutors. And yet, in not one of those cases did a permit holder accidentally shoot a bystander. In not one of those cases did a police officer, when they arrived on the scene, accidentally shoot the permit holder. So these are possibilities. Sure, it might possibly happen, but you at least like to think that somebody could point to actual cases where those types of concerns have been borne out. Now, there's surveys of police on this issue, and they show pretty much the same results. I'm just going to show you the largest survey This is done by Police One, which is the largest private organization of police in the country. They have about 450,000 members. 380,000 of them are active, full-time law enforcement officers. The other 380,000 are retired police officers. And they asked them a number of questions. One of the questions was concerning the particulars. This was done in 2013, and this survey had 14,000 of their members. Considering the particulars of the recent tragedies like Newtown and Aurora, what level of impact do you think legally armed citizens could have made? Choose a statement that you feel is most accurate. 80% of police officers around the country said that allowing permanent concealed handguns in these gun-free zones would reduce the number of casualties. 6.2% said it would avoid them altogether. So that's about 86% said that it would either reduce or eliminate these things. You only have the remaining part that say it would either have no effect or they're not sure, and just 4% said, or 5% it would make it worse. Now, I'm not going to have time to go through this, but you can go and look it up on SSRM, but Bill Landis and I have worked on mass public shootings. We looked at all the mass public shootings in the United States from 1977 to 1999. And what we found, looking at 13 different types of gun laws, is the only one that had any impact on these mass public shootings was the passage of right to carry laws. And it was a huge impact. You saw about a 60% drop in the rate of mass public shootings and about 80% drop in the rate at which people were injured. And to the extent to which these attacks still occurred, they occurred in those tiny areas within the states where people weren't able to go and protect themselves. Why is it so large? Well, think of it this way. As the probability that people can defend themselves increases, you see greater deterrence. And the issue here is that if you have 6% of the adult population that has permits, that's some risk to a criminal who may attack somebody late at night or in a dark alley or a parking lot, and some risk and some deterrence. But let's say you're talking about a room like this. I don't know, we have maybe 120, 150 people, whatever, in this room. Even if there's only a 6% chance that any one individual has a concealed handgun permit, what would be the probability that at least someone, assuming probabilities are independent, I know this is a federal society thing, so it may not be, but assuming the probabilities were independent, the probability that someone who would be unknown to an attacker who would come into the room would have a permanent concealed handgun would be essentially 100%. And so the higher the probability, the greater the deterrence that you see there. Now, here's the important thing. This applies to France. What did the president of France do after the Charlie Hebdo attack in January? What did he do now? He put more soldiers on the street, more uniformed soldiers. 1,500 this time. Here's the problem. Terrorists have huge strategic advantages, all right? If you put an armed soldier in front of a building, what can the terrorists do? They can either kill that person first, right? Or they can wait for them to leave, or they can pick another target. I don't care whether you put 10,000 or 40,000 or 100,000 uniformed troops in a city of millions of people like Paris. What Israel has learned the hard way is that if terrorists are willing to be patient long enough, some vulnerable targets are going to open up. It's simply impossible for them to go and cover that. The advantage that you have for a permanent concealed handgun is the terrorist doesn't know who they have to be worried about. If you have a couple police on a bus and a terrorist is there and the police leave, he still doesn't know whether there's somebody in front or behind or to the side of him that he has to go and worry about. Now, here's the deal. Let me just conclude here. You have, since 1950, with just 2 exceptions, all the mass public shootings in the United States have taken place where guns are banned. Every one in Europe has taken place where guns are banned. These are not random. I could go on and talk to you about time after time where these killers explicitly talk about picking a place where they don't believe people have guns because they know that they can kill more people before they get stopped. They explicitly and chillingly talk about this time after time. And this isn't random that all these cases keep on occurring where victims can't defend themselves. And you know, Ron Noble, who's the Secretary General of Interpol, kind of Europe's version of the FBI, recently came out with a statement. He's been head of that for 15 years. And he said when he originally became head, he was a strong gun control advocate. But he said, in order to try to stop these attacks, you have two options. You can create a gun-free zone. But what he's learned is it's impossible to do that. These guys plan these attacks 6 months or 2 years in advance. And the notion that you're going to be able to stop a terrorist from figuring out some way, or a mass killer from bringing a gun into a movie theater, into a mall, is wishful thinking. He says there's no way you're going to be able to stop them. And even if you stop them in one, there's going to be some other venue that they're going to figure it out how to do that. He said the only people you stop are the law-abiding good citizens from being able to carry. And he said he believed, he's changed his mind, that the thing is, rather than disarming only the law-abiding good citizens and making it easier for attacks, he said we need to seriously consider letting victims be able to go and defend themselves. Thank you very much for your time. I greatly appreciate
it. Ms. Gavran, you'll have 2 extra minutes if you want it.
For having me here today, and this is my first debate officially. I have been in large crowds before, but never under these circumstances, so if you can bear with me a little bit. First I'm going to start with the background of campus carry. To begin, gun-free zones, or guns banned from schools, started with the University of Virginia with the founding fathers of the Second Amendment. They actually had said, and they were also on the Board of Regents, that we do not want guns on the University of Virginia campus. Following the Columbine shootings in April of 1999, the NRA Executive Vice President Wayne LaPierre publicly stated that we believe absolutely gun-free, zero-tolerance, totally safe schools. That means no guns in American schools, period, with the rare exception of law enforcement officers or trained security. It's also interesting to note that in the Columbine shootings, there were armed guards there that exchanged fire with one of the shooters. Following the Virginia Tech tragedy, there was a shift. The NRA started to push for campus carry, and in August of 2007, the Virginia Tech Review Panel had also suggested that campuses remain gun-free, that under the scenario and the situation that happened on Virginia Tech, a concealed carry holder could not have stopped anything. Here, I'm going to just quickly do this. If you guys want this information a little bit later, I'd be more than happy to share, but this is just, you know, current laws in some of the states. And actually, Utah, Colorado, Idaho, Mississippi are the ones that mandate and cannot ban anywhere on campus. Some of these are parking lot states only, and just one correction, in Michigan State, it's actually on the public campus, you cannot carry inside buildings in Michigan State. Gun-free schools are constitutional. The District of Columbia says that self-defense should be within the home, and sensitive places, schools should remain gun-free, and this was also reinforced 2 years later with McDonald versus Chicago. Colleges are extremely safe environments. Basically, we have very low crime rates on campus, especially violent crime. Unfortunately, the sexual assault rate is high. This also has to do with drugs and alcohol and age. But if you look at per 100,000, this is the state versus all public college and universities in the nation, you have a 0.1 murder rate versus 4.4. Aggravated assault, which is one of the reasons why a lot of people want campus carry, you have 228.6 per 100,000, and on campus it's 9.1. Here in Texas, 4.4, the same with the national average. And on campus, 0.07. It's interesting to note that the one murder that did happen in 2013 was a domestic violence in a parking lot at UT Southwestern. And here, for Austin, we've got the City of Austin versus UT and Austin Community College campuses. And again, very low crime rates versus even the city, and Austin is a fairly safe city. Increased risk for suicide. It's definitely an important issue. And I also wanted to note that there was a study that where 150 responded to this questionnaire that if there was a gun in the home, 84% there would be increased chance of suicide. Access to a firearm definitely increases this. And here is just a breakdown of what college students face. It's also interesting to note that UT Austin had to decrease their counseling sessions per student and also charge per visit because of state funding cuts. CHL holders are a threat to public safety in an active shooting situation. Dr. Lies already touched on that. In addition to the two things he mentioned, they are also the first to be targeted. If an active shooter sees someone pull out a gun, they're going to automatically go towards that person. And I'm not going to go over everything else that he did, I'll say that. Studies have shown that there's no evidence that CHL holders reduce crime. So it's not to say they increase crime, but there is absolutely no statistics that show that it decreases. There is one report from the National Research Center where 15 out of the 16 members concluded that the existing research on more guns, less crime was inadequate to conclude concealed carry increased or decreased crime. Also, most recently is a 2015 study by Texas A&M where they did something different. They looked at counties and the number of permits that were issued and how the crime rates went up or down with those permit issues. And there, again, same results, nothing to say that it would increase or decrease crime rates. It also found a correlation with the presence of gun dealers and the increase of firearm permits. The majority of stakeholders oppose concealed carry on campus. That's everybody that is associated with a college and a university. Anyone like the NRA or outside entities, you notice, don't really have a stake in the university. But American Association of Professors, teachers, law enforcement, faculty, senate, student governments across the state, across the nation really, are against campus carry. The very people that are on the campus. Finally, the economic issue or impact on college campuses is another thing that everyone seems to overlook. In Texas alone, this law is estimated to cost $47 million. MD Anderson, the cost would come from cancer research money. They've already discovered this. The UT system would cost $17 million. That's all UT schools. Texas Tech, $7 million. University of Houston, $8 million. Texas State, $2.7 million, and the list goes on. It's very costly. Campus sexual assault, finally. And I actually did a study at the beginning of this year because I knew that this was going to be a hot issue with the Texas legislature because they want to stop assaults on campus. They want to stop sexual assault. So what I had done is I had taken crime research or crime data from Cleary in Utah and Colorado, where campus carry has been allowed for quite some time now, and compared it to the state level, their respective state, and then also the national crime rates. What I found here was that if you look at the non-campus, the sexual assault rates are actually going down. Non-campus carry states are going up, and Utah, which I kind of had to exclude Colorado because there are only 2 years of data, so I specifically did Utah, and I'm also the first to admit that there are flaws with the study because of the small sample size. But if the argument is correct, and Utah is a heavily armed state, that the presence of concealed carry is going to decrease crime, then these crime rates should be going down, and they're not. They're going up. Also, these are some of the other factors with campus sexual assault, and if you notice, a lot of it has to do with drugs and alcohol. If there are drugs and alcohol in presence, or the person who has a CHL is under the influence, they are breaking the law. And that's an important thing to know. The other thing is, most victims know their perpetrator. How is someone going to be able to pull a gun on someone that they know? It's very, very rare that that would happen. So the current Texas law, right now, before SB 11 takes effect, those with the CHL may keep their gun in the car, locked on campus, and they also may carry their weapon on all public walkways throughout the campus. They cannot bring them into buildings. This law will change that. Universities are allowed to carve out gun-free zones. Open carry of handguns will not be permitted. And once the university presidents of all the state schools, they must submit their recommendations to the Board of Regents. And if the Board of Regents disagrees, they have to amend that with a 2/3 vote. And that's all I have. I kind of flew through that because I knew we were running out of time. So go ahead and...
Each speaker will now have 5 minutes to rebut or continue the presentation.
Right. Yeah, no, I appreciate Ms. Gavin's comments. Just a couple things right off. With regard to studies, there's basically about 4 dozen peer-reviewed studies by criminologists and economists that look at national and U.S. data on this issue. And you'll find about over 2/3 of the studies find that there is a statistically significant benefit in terms of reduced crime. About 1/3 claim that there's no effect. None of the peer-reviewed published studies have found a bad effect with regard to murder, rape, or robbery. There's one study that claims to find a small temporary effect, bad effect with regard to aggravated assaults. So the fact that you can point to a couple studies, I'm not really sure, that show no effect, what it is. But here's the key, and that is the worst that these studies claim is that there's no effect. And with regard to the National Research Council, their report was on firearms in general. And one thing just to note is they didn't say anything. I don't know if you read through the National Research Council reports, but almost never do they claim that anything works. And I could go through and tell you why the history of that is. So it's nothing unusual here. In fact, the unusual thing is that there was actually a dissent. James Q. Wilson, probably at the time the preeminent, he's dead now, but preeminent criminologist in the country, pointed out that their own work, that if you looked at their own estimates, every single one of their estimates for murder actually showed a benefit in terms of reduced crime. Now, with regard to suicide, I mentioned just briefly the lower suicide rate for permit holders in Michigan. But here's the issue, and that is there's lots of ways people can commit suicide. And when you look at total suicides, basically lots of people have looked at this, and they don't find any change in terms of total suicides. What happens is when we change gun laws or gun ownership, you basically have it so that people change the method that they use to commit suicide, rather than going and changing the total level of suicides that are there. The cost of implementing concealed carry. Here's the irony. The schools are claiming, the one estimate you said, for $47 million, they're claiming that they need to do this because of the threat of increased violence because of permit holders. And yet in the very studies, the worst ones that she can cite on the other side, basically claim that there's no effect. So it's not even clear how they go and justify this type of thing. I would argue there probably would be even savings to the extent that it goes and reduces violent crime. Now, is it true that college campuses have lower crime rates than the rest of the United States? There's absolutely no doubt about that. As I said, you see big variations. 70% of the counties in the United States have 0 murders in any given year. But I would argue that the places that benefit the most are the ones where there are the highest crime rates. The people who benefit the most are 2 groups. They're basically poor blacks who live in high crime urban areas. The people who are most likely to be victims of violent crime are the ones who benefit the most. And the other group that benefits the most are people who are relatively weaker physically, women and the elderly. When you're talking about a young male criminal attacking a victim, when it's a female or an elderly person, there's a lot larger strength differential that exists there on average than a male attacking another male. And the presence of a gun represents a much bigger relative change in that person's ability to go and resist an attack when it's either a male or a female or an elderly person. Okay, but even though you already have lower crime rates, and you see a smaller drop, that still doesn't mean that there's not a benefit. It just means that it's smaller. And so much of the debate these days is driven by these mass public shootings, and those are targets. I'll just go through briefly. as I mentioned in the talk, you can't ignore the fact that these mass public shooters, time after time, whether it's the Charleston church shooter, or whether it's the diary that came forward with the Aurora Batman movie theater shooter, or last year with the Santa Barbara shooter, if you read his 141-page manifesto, or you look at the mass public shooter in New Brunswick, Canada last year, who had pictures making fun of gun-free zones on his Facebook page. And one of his comics was a mass shooter killing people, one of the victims trying to run away, turning back towards the killer saying, "Guns are illegal here. Don't you know you're breaking the law having a gun here? It's illegal for you to shoot me." As the mass killer has a bubble above his head saying that the guy is a moron as he's pointing his gun at him, supposedly ready to kill him. These guys consciously, unbelievably, think about these things all the time when they're trying to go and kill people. And so if you're worried also about mass public shootings, these are targets. I'll just leave you one thing to think about, and that is, God forbid somebody was stalking you. If it was, would you feel safer putting a sign in front of your home that said your home is a gun-free zone? Would that make you feel, well, to look at the sign and realize that they shouldn't bring a weapon in to go and attack me? Or would it have the opposite effect of actually being a magnet to cause them to be more likely to come in and attack you there? Thank you very much for your time.
First thing to answer about the sign in the front yard. My name is out there in the public. It's pretty obvious I don't own a gun. I would not have a problem putting that sign out. I have 2 dogs. I love them to death, and they would protect me. So, a few things to quickly respond to. The Aurora and Santa Barbara shooters. The Aurora shooter did not target a gun-free zone. He wanted mass casualties. He thought about going to an airport, did not go to the airport because he didn't want to be suspected of terrorism. The Santa Barbara shooter went to a sorority. He had a problem with women, and where else are there a large group of women at a sorority? Most of the time, mass shooters, they are emotionally connected to the place that they go. The thing to keep in mind is a CHL holder who gets 4 hours of training, shoots a target at 20 feet, a stationary target. And the reason why it's at 20 feet is because it would take two seconds for a man to get from where he is to you. So you're expected to draw your gun and accurately shoot at that person in a matter of 2 seconds. That's not a way to stop a mass shooter. Not to mention that most mass shooters come with heavily armed semi-automatic rifles in bulletproof vests. Law-abiding citizens. Now let's take this for 1 second. Yes, law-abiding citizen CHL holders have to pass a background check. Most of the time, when a person with a weapons violation is taken to court, they will plead down, so that way it's a misdemeanor and not a felony, and they can keep their license. It's very important to know that. It's also important to know that there are thousands of people who do not apply for a CHL license that could pass that, and they are just as, if not more, law-abiding than that CHL holder. And actually, the list of incidents of accidental discharge, shootings, and everything else, these are just 4 states in a matter of 5 years. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13.
By permit holders?
By permit holders.
On campuses?
On campuses. Got your turn. You can look them up.
Well, yeah.
Okay, so finally, and the other thing about SB 11, okay, it's not going to accomplish anything. This is a law, and I want to quote Representative Fletcher, and he said this on the floor of the House debate. Many folks have said that they, under no circumstances, want this bill to allow someone to carry on campus in a classroom. But with all due respect, it's my contention that they are already carrying on campus. And what this bill does is keep the men and women of Texas who are at least 21 years of age and have the right to carry a CHL. It keeps them from putting themselves in a position just to protect themselves from breaking the law. That's all this law is doing, is protecting the CHL holders from not breaking a law. It is not helping us, and it's not serving a purpose other than the CHL holder. Thank you.
At this time, we'd like to open up to some questions. If you go ahead and raise your hand. first.
There were some issues that I didn't hear either. Both of you made really excellent arguments, and thank you. There were some issues that I didn't hear either one of you address that other people may be curious about too, and that would be the general psychological impact that this has on students on college campuses, especially students of color and women. I think it's well known that people of color who are carrying guns are perceived very differently and do not really have a legal right to do that, and I think that this law can be very psychologically damaging to many youth on campus who are more likely to be victims of shootings in general and who may perceive this as a threatening environment. For example, a lot of students who come from areas where there is a lot of violence and who are fortunate enough to attend TT and who may hope to go back to their communities and help to prevent violence in those communities will experience a more threatening environment on campus, knowing that other students are carrying guns and may be less likely to complete their degree and go back to their home community and try and work against violence there. So I was wondering if either one of you could address the general psychological impact that this would have on campuses and whether there's been any studies on that. Because for me personally, I see that as being the biggest impact. As Ms. Gavran said, students are probably already carrying guns, but this is kind of a public statement that certain students are allowed to carry guns, and I think that's part of the big impact that we're looking at. Sorry, I didn't talk so much.
So, do you think this makes a big statement when you're off of campus? I mean, you can carry virtually any place in the state off of campus here. I'm not sure, do you feel the women who are carrying around the state here in Texas, I think it's almost 30% of the permit holders are females here in the state? Are they feeling somehow put upon or something, that there's some stigma for them carrying? I don't think so. And the thing is, you know, you look at any of these debates that occur, it's interesting to see what happens the year after a state passes a concealed handgun, because all the issues, all the concerns about that are raised here for campus carry have been raised when you pass the original concealed carry laws in the state. You know, the same concerns about people behaving improperly are all raised, and they don't occur. And about a year after or 6 months after a law gets passed, state newspapers will have headlines that say, you know, fears about people carrying concealed handguns haven't taken place. And you see, people realize it's a non-issue. All the concerns, my guess is a year after this goes into effect, you're going to have the same reaction that people have had in all the states, because you can carry in all the states now, okay, have had, and that is, what was the big debate about? Why were people concerned? I'll mention one other thing really quickly, and that is, if you look at police, when they stop somebody and you have to tell them whether you're carrying, you know, whether you have a concealed carry permit, police are relieved to find anybody that they stop is carrying a concealed handgun permit, because they know how incredibly law-abiding those citizens are relative to somebody else. They'd much rather go, I mean, you can look at surveys of police, they'd much rather stop somebody of any race, okay, or any gender, that they're a concealed carry permit holder, because they know those are the last people that they have anything to worry about.
To add to that, I think another issue too is international students. I go to school at UT Dallas. We're 40% international. They are not allowed to have a CHL. They automatically become targets. This isn't about incidents. This isn't about accidental discharges or anything like that. This is about the psychological effect of knowing that either your professor or a fellow student may be carrying it next to you and being afraid to say something in the classroom.
For the next question, just want to preface, and we need to keep it a little bit briefer just because we're running out of time. But, ma'am, would you like to?
Thanks. I'll try to make this as quick as I can. So I'm Lisa Moore. I'm an English professor. I'm an educator, and I really want to speak to the law students in the room. I know that you are excellent researchers, and if you do the research, you will find that virtually everything that Dr. Lott has said today is untrue, and he himself has been seriously discredited. If you don't, we've aggregated all of the relevant research on virtually every issue he raised on the Gun Free UT website, but if you don't trust us, you will be able to do that same research yourself. I know you have excellent research skills, and we'll be armed with reason. We'll all be armed with reason. We're not concerned, I'm not concerned about permit holders. I'm concerned about guns per se. I'm concerned about accidental deaths. I'm concerned about guns lying around. In every situation where there's gun violence, regardless of whether it was a good guy or a bad guy, the thing that we know that caused the death or injury is the gun. Increasing the numbers of guns on campus cannot help but increase the numbers of injuries and deaths that might be possible from those guns.
Ma'am,
And that's what's happening everywhere.
Please let them ask a question.
Okay, so what I want to ask you is, what do you have to say what do you have to say about the impact of this bill on the and on campus carry on the safety of students at UT?
Well, again, I think it's going to come down to suicides. Honestly, threatening. A lot of these defensive gun uses don't include threats. It doesn't take much for someone to say, "I'm carrying," and that right there is a threat. It doesn't involve pulling out the gun. It doesn't involve shooting someone.
Right.
It changes the atmosphere.
Yeah.
I assume I can respond briefly. And that is, look, I mean, surely this is a politically charged debate. Lots of claims go out there. You can go to our website at crimeresearch.org. You can see a list of published academic papers that are on there. The ones that I was mentioning, there are links to the individual papers. You can go and read them. So it's just not myself that's involved in the debate. You have academics from across the country. And, you know, if you want to, and we also have detailed responses to some of the different claims that are out there with regard to my research. But again, it's not my research. It's lots of academics, dozens of peer-reviewed studies that have been out there that find that there's a benefit. So pick one of those or pick a couple dozen of those if you want to go and look at them. You can find them at crimeresearch.org.
We have time for one more question. This is far back there.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Johnson. I'm a graduate student here in the history department. Dr. Lott, just to follow up on a little bit on what you were just saying, an interesting difference that I saw between your presentation and Ms. Gavin's presentation was that Ms. Gavin's presentation had all of her sources listed at the bottom of each slide, and except for Police One, you didn't mention any of the research that you're saying that's on your website. And what I'm wondering, two questions actually. I'm wondering if you would be willing to take your presentation and the specific studies that you're talking about and work them in there so that we can link exactly what you're talking about with the research. And I'm also wondering about the Police One survey, if you could comment on what exactly that was. Was that like an online poll on the website? Was that a survey that was conducted with sociologists? So I'm wondering about just the source exactly.
Right. Well, first of all, I did list different sources there. So for example, when I was looking at the revocation rates for permit holders, I mentioned the source at Department of Public Safety for the Texas numbers that were there. Florida, I had the source for there. With regard to police, I mentioned that there was a police study, quarterly study. I gave the date. It was December 2010 when that study was published on that. So, I mean, there's a number of references that were in the slides there. Maybe we went through them too quickly, but I tried to read them off while I was going through them. And so if there's a particular number or study, you know, claim that was in there that you didn't think or don't remember whether I was referencing something, then please ask it, and I'm happy to go through it. But again, you know, if you miss the references, you can go to our website at crimeresearch.org, and you can find the things there. But those are quite readily available.
Could you come on the Police One study, please? Exactly
Yeah, sure.
That was.
Police One, they had Scott Armstrong at the at Wharton Business School actually consulted with them on putting together their survey that they did. They had a mail survey that they sent out, but they tried to adjust it for things like they have information on the rank of the police officers to try to weight it so that you know, the people that did respond corresponded to the weightings that they have for the actual number of members that they had by rank of police officer, and also there's geographic weighting.
We've got time for a super fast one from a law student, please. Yes, ma'am, right there.
Do you think there should be certain restrictions, like let's say we permit guns on campus, what we all can go into. Do you think there should be restrictions on how easy it is to get a gun?
You want to have a specific question there?
Right, so do you think there should be certain types of rifles that people should be allowed to bring into campus as opposed to other types of guns?
Rifles. You said rifles.
Or guns, I'm sorry, I'm not very gun literate.
No. Well,
Excuse me.
Well, I mean, yeah, well, we're going to be talking about handguns since we're talking about concealed guns. But look, I mean, you have rules right now in place in Texas in terms of people being able to get a concealed handgun permit. We know the problems of revocation rates. You've had it since 1996, these rules, so there's a lot of years. You know, you have 2 decades of data on this, on revocation rates. And as I was mentioning, these are incredibly law-abiding citizens in Texas. And so, and you have people who can carry, you know, professors who can carry off campus, staff who can carry off campus, but they can't carry on campus. And there's no evidence that I know of that indicates that they're any different than the rest of the general population in terms of how law-abiding they are off campus as compared to what they would be on campus. I mean, you know, if you want to talk about some other types of background checks or something, I'm happy to try to answer questions about
Sure.
that.
Can you go into that a little bit more? Do you think there should be more restrictions on background checks? Because I think it's fine with guns, but do you think there should be background checks on the type of people who should be getting guns?
Right. Well, again, well, first of all, there are background checks that occur. There are background checks to buy guns, or background checks to go and get the concealed handgun permit. Everybody who gets a permit has to go and get it. The big debate right now is over so-called universal background checks. And again, that has nothing to change with regard to permits when you're buying a gun from a federally licensed dealer. The only thing that this would change would be for all private transfers of guns, there would be a background check. My belief is that the reason that they push this isn't to reduce crime, because there's really, academic evidence doesn't indicate it reduces crime. It's just to make it more costly to obtain a gun. In New York, universal background checks add about $80 on the cost of transferring a gun. In Colorado, they add about $70 onto the cost. I'll just give you one example. I was involved a little bit in Colorado when they were passing the bill there, and an amendment was put up to exempt people below the poverty level from having to pay the state tax on the transfer of guns there. With the exception of 2 pro-gun Democrats, every Democrat in the legislature voted against exempting people below the poverty level from having to pay the state tax. In Maryland, when they had, it cost $300 to license and register a handgun there, the Democrats, since they control 2/3 of the House and Senate, wouldn't even let the vote come up to exempt people below the poverty level from having to go and pay those taxes. And the question is, can you name any other taxes that Democrats would vote essentially unanimously against exempting people below the poverty level from having to pay? You know, if you believe that these universal background checks reduce crime, and I don't, I could talk about that. But if you do, then it's a benefit to everybody, not just the law-abiding citizen who goes through FFL to transfer a gun that's there. And as an economist, I would go and argue that everybody should pay for it, rather than just the law-abiding people who obey the rules. And but my guess is if you were to go and mention that to a gun control advocate, they would go ballistic, because they particularly want just the people buying the gun to pay the tax, and not to have everybody who'd be benefiting pay it.
Great, let's thank our speakers. Before we go, Dr. Lott, what's the website that you want to direct them to?
Crimeresearch.org. I have a couple copies of books if people want to.
And Gun for UT, what's your website?
Gunfreeut.org. We have a lot of great research up there. And Facebook, join us at Gunfreeut. And there's a lot of great information out there about Mr. Lott. He has another name, which is Mary Roche.
Thank you. And Ms. Gavin, your website, please.
Google Mary Roche and John Lott, and you'll get the real story behind this guy, okay?
Ms. Gavin, your website, please.
We also have a website, it's keepgunsoffcampus.org.
Great. Thank you all. Come on down and talk to the speakers.